Good evening. This is SPJ New England Student News live from Suffolk University Studio 73 in Boston. I'm Amrita Kumar.
And I'm Emily Dempsey. Today is Election Day, November 5th, and we have a great show for you tonight. First, we have an exclusive interview in Washington, D.C. with American University professor Alan Lichtman.
Professor Lichtman has successfully predicted the outcome of 9 of the last 10 presidential elections. With more on this, here's Emerson College's Madison Lucchese.
This is Kelly Broder, SPJ New England correspondent for Student News Live. I'm here today with Brian McGrory, chair of the journalism department at Boston University and former executive editor of the Boston Globe. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
To start off, could you tell me a bit about how you think the media has done this election cycle?
So that's a really good question. I think it's been a really, really complicated cycle for the media. It's sort of the third straight complicated presidential election cycle for the media. All of these years in, the news media is still trying to get its head around what Donald Trump's candidacy means and all the ways that it's breaking every kind of convention imaginable. And this time, even more than the others, I think the media has, for the most part, done a good job, but it has been a struggle trying to portray a candidacy which has been intentionally outside every conceivable line that we've had before. And, the real challenge is how do you let an electorate know just how different Donald Trump is than what we've had in the past without seeing bias? And bottom line is he's a convicted felon who is exhibiting authoritarian tendencies, whose many of his closest advisors and senior staff in his public life, his presidential life, are dead set against his candidacy. He is being vitriolic and profane on the campaign trail. He is suggesting violence. And all of that just makes him such an outlier from anything we've had before, including his 2 prior campaigns, that it's been a challenge for the media to properly capture this without people accusing them of some form of bias.
Understandable, I think, especially, the audience members and the voters. I think
Let's take a look at Alan Lichtman's interview from American University.
This is Madison Lucchese, your SPJ New England correspondent for Student News Live. I am here with Alan Lichtman, a distinguished professor of history at American University.
We're good?
He also established the 13 keys to the White House, which he has used to predict 9 out of the last 10 presidential elections, though he maintains that Al Gore actually won the presidency in 2000. Professor Lichtman, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Pleasure. I'm ready to go.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about the 13 keys and how they work?
Yeah. The 13 keys don't pay attention to the pundits. I love them, but they have no scientific basis for their opinions about who's going to win or lose elections and no track record. They don't turn on the horse race polls, which are snapshots, but are abused as predictors. Rather, the 13 keys reflect how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. Imagine that. The big message is it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. And the way it works, they're all equally weighted as true-false questions. If 6 or more of the 13 keys are false, the White House party is a predicted loser. Fewer than 6 keys, the White House party is a predicted winner. And here quickly are the keys: mandate based on U.S. House elections, incumbency, contests for the White House party, third party, short and long-term economy, policy change, social unrest, scandal, foreign/military failures and successes. And only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates. And they're really high threshold keys. They ask if the incumbent or challenging candidate are one of those once in a generation, across the board, inspirational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat, or Ronald Reagan, the Republican.
That is awesome, that all of that information. And I like that there's only 2 keys that are about the candidate themselves, because really so much more goes into the presidential election than just the candidates themselves.
That's right. And often I'm able to predict elections. Sometimes the keys fall into place before I even know who the candidates are. For example, I predicted in 2006 that the incumbent Republicans would lose the presidency in 2008. And of course, we had no idea who the candidates were going to be, but I said things were going so badly on the other keys for the Republicans that the Democrats could pick a name out of the phone book and elect that person president. And of course, that's what they did. Who had ever heard of Barack Obama, a state senator from Illinois?
Wow, that is crazy. I had no idea. Obviously, when it was 2006, I was very young, but that's amazing that you just be able to figure that out without even knowing the candidates.
Correct.
So a little bit
Most
more
of the
about,
keys have nothing to do with the candidates.
yeah. So a little bit more about the keys. How did you come up with them?
I'd love to tell you, students, I came up with them by ruining my eyes in the archives, by deep and long contemplation. But if I were to tell you that, to quote the late, not so great Richard Nixon, that would be wrong. There was a lot of serendipity involved here. In 1981, I was a distinguished visiting scholar at Caltech in Southern California. And there I met the world's leading authority on earthquake prediction, Vladimir Kyla-Sporok from Moscow. And he said, we're going to collaborate. And being brilliant and foresightful, I said, no, we're not. Earthquakes may be a big deal here in Southern California at Caltech. I got to go back to American University in DC. Nobody cares about earthquakes there. And he said, oh no, I already solved earthquakes. Right. He said, get this. In 1963, he was a member of the Soviet scientific delegation that came to DC and negotiated the most important treaty in the history of the world. It's the treaty why you young people are still here, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that stopped us from poisoning our atmosphere, our oceans, and our soil. And he said in DC, I fell in love with politics and always wanted to use the methods of earthquake prediction, of pattern recognition, to predict elections. But I live in the Soviet Union. Elections, forget it. It's supreme leader or off with your head. But you, me, you're an expert in the presidency, American politics and history. And we thus became the odd couple of political research. Remember, this is 81. So we looked retrospectively at every election, from the election of Lincoln in the horse and buggy days of politics in 1860 to the election of Reagan in 1980. And we used Kyla-Sporok's method of pattern recognition to discern what patterns could separate out in geophysical terms: stability, the White House party keeps power; earthquake, they're turned out of power. And that research produced the 13 keys and the 6 keys and you're out decision rule.
Wow. The fact that it came from a model for earthquakes is insane. It's wild. But I also think it's interesting that you started with the Lincoln presidency, the Lincoln election. Is there a reason why you didn't start with the presidencies before that?
Well, the reason we started that was it gave us plenty of time, 120 years. Plus, that was the first year of the contemporary two-party system of Republicans versus Democrats. And you got to start somewhere, and that's a good starting point. Plus, the farther back you go, the more dubious the statistics, and even earlier, the whole system was different.
It definitely was totally different. I just was curious if there was any other reason why, but that's very interesting. So you've correctly predicted 9 out of the last 10 elections since 1984, though you maintain you should be 10 for 10. What happened in the election that got away?
I know, because I did the report on the election for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And my report, still on their website, you can look it up, proved that based on the intent of voters, Al Gore should have won Florida going away in the presidency. Because I proved that 1 out of 9 to 10 votes cast by a 95% Democratic African American were tossed out by Florida officials. These weren't African Americans who were prevented from voting. If you had lined up 9 or 10 African Americans who thought they voted, you would have pulled out one and say, sorry, your vote doesn't count. That compared to 1 out of 50 votes tossed out for predominantly Republican whites. Moreover, most of the discarded disproportional African American votes were not those hanging chads or dimples, but overvotes. For good reason, African Americans didn't trust the system. After all, the governor was the brother of the Republican candidate. So on those crazy punch cards, they punched in Gore, and then to be sure, wrote in Gore, and all those ballots were discarded. My point from the Civil Rights Commission report was independently validated by one of the nation's leading political scientists in a study I had nothing to do with, by Professor Walter Mebane of Cornell University, and his study was entitled "The Wrong Man is President!" But historians will argue about 2000 forever.
I agree. We've been talking about the election of 2000 here at Emerson College in the newsroom, and where things have gone wrong and all of those types of things, to see if we can predict what's going to happen in this year's election. But we're no experts the way that you are. Speaking of predictions, you were originally predicting that Joe Biden was going to win the election, even after.
No, I need to correct you there.
Yes.
I never said Joe Biden was going to win. I didn't issue a prediction until September 5th, when Harris was what I said was, I was very critical of the Democrats for openly trashing and viciously their sitting president out in public. I've never seen that before. And I thought they were headed for disaster, that they would push Biden out and lose my incumbency key, and have a big party brawl and lose the contest key. No White House party has ever won re-election since 1900 when losing both those keys. But I never predicted that Biden would win the election. I made no final prediction until September 5th. Who knows what would have happened if Biden stayed in? Impossible to tell.
Okay, well, thank you for correcting me. So why are you now predicting that Harris will win?
Yeah, remember, it takes 6 keys to count out Harris and the incumbent Democrats, and they're only down 4. Mandate key, because the Democrats lost U.S. House elections in 2022. Incumbency, obviously, because Biden's out. Foreign policy failure. The Middle East is a disaster, a humanitarian catastrophe with no good end in sight. And incumbent charisma. Whatever you may think of Harris, she's only been a candidate for a little while. She certainly hasn't reached the status of an FDR. That's only 4. Take 6 keys to predict Donald Trump would come back to the White House and Harris would lose. That's why I'm predicting America will have its first woman president, at least cracking, if not shattering, the glass ceiling, and our first president of mixed African and Asian descent, kind of foreshadowing where the U.S. is going. We're rapidly becoming a majority minority country. Old white guys like me are on the way out.
Definitely, times are changing, and I do think myself that Harris is charismatic, but I see definitely not the way that past presidents have been, or candidates like that. That's awesome.
You have to stick to how the keys are defined, not what you might think. You know, a lot of people think Trump is charismatic, but he only appeals to a narrow base, doesn't fit the definition. You know, in 4 years as president, his approval rating on average in the Gallup poll was 41%, the narrow base, putting him right at the bottom of presidents. So I got to go soon, so we need to wrap up soon.
Absolutely. So what do you think would have to go wrong for Harris to lose?
I can't see anything in a week. You know, the biggest myth in American politics is the October surprise. I've always made my predictions before then and never changed them. Biggest October surprise we had was in 2016, when the Access Hollywood tape came out showing Trump bragging about sexually assaulting women, and lots of women came out and said, yeah, that's exactly what he did to me. Even Republicans thought he was finished. But I stuck to my prediction of a Trump win, which did not make me very popular in 90% Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University. But if I'd listened to the critics, I never do, I would have been wrong.
Absolutely. Sometimes having a popular opinion just isn't needed. Well, we will soon see if your nearly unbroken streak will continue. Professor Lichtman, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. You know, I'm 77 and I still get butterflies in my stomach every 4 years because I can be proven right or wrong. I tell you who's going to win, not like the pundits and the pollsters who give you these meaningless probabilities, which could be right, could be wrong, who knows. All right, take care.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, Madison. Now let's take a look at the impact of national media coverage on today's election.
Joining SPJ correspondent Kelly Broder is Boston University's Journalism Department Chair and former Boston Globe editor Brian McGrory.
This is Kelly Broder, SPJ New England correspondent for Student News Live. I'm here today with Brian McGrory, chair of the Journalism Department at Boston University and former
Lane, can you
executive
change,
editor of the Boston Globe. Brian, thank you for joining us
Thank
today.
you,
Pleasure to be
Jenny,
here.
to thank you, Kelly.
To start off, could you tell me a bit about how you think the media has done this election cycle?
So that's a really good question. I think it's been a really, really complicated cycle for the media. It's
A
sort
lot.
of the
Yeah.
third straight complicated presidential election cycle for the media.
Where-
All of these years in,
so I'm at the Daily.
the news media is still trying to get its head around what Donald
Is-
Trump's candidacy
Yeah.
means
And are you like a
and
broadcast?
all the
You're
ways that
just
it's
broadcasting?
breaking every kind of
Broadcast
convention
is like
imaginable.
recognizable.
And this time,
Okay.
Like, I'm like, not
even more than the others.
Yeah, print
I think the media
mostly.
has,
Okay.
for the most part, done a good job, but it has been a struggle trying to portray a candidacy which has been intentionally outside every conceivable line that we've had before. And, you know, the real challenge is, how do you let an electorate know just how different Donald
Gotcha.
Trump is than what we've had in the past
Totally.
All right, thank
without seeing bias? And bottom line is, he's a convicted felon who is
you. Yeah, I'm like.
exhibiting authoritarian tendencies, who's many of his closest advisors and
Lane, do
senior
you mind turning it
staff
down just a little
in
bit? 'Cause I
his
was-
public life, his presidential life,
or up,
are
rather.
dead set against his candidacy. He is being vitriolic and profane on the campaign trail. He
Okay,
is
perfect, thank you.
suggesting violence, and all of that just makes him such an outlier from anything we've had before, including his two prior campaigns, that it's been a challenge for the media to properly capture this without people accusing them of some form of bias.
Understandable, I think, especially, you know, the audience members and the voters, I think, are very confused sort of in seeing this phenomenon happen for the last couple of campaigns. And maybe some are surprised and maybe some expect this from him. And recently Jeff Bezos decided that the Washington Post editors would not endorse a candidate. What do you make of this decision happening just before the election? Were you surprised, and what impact do you think this has on voters?
Yeah, so look, Bezos can make that decision. It's his news organization. He has a right to make that decision. There's some sense in that decision for newspapers to get out of the endorsement game. You know, honestly, I don't know whether a newspaper endorsement has ever won a single vote for a single candidate in the history of the printing press. The problem is his timing. His timing was just exquisitely awful. Having this come a week or 10 days before, 10 or 11 days before this presidential race, breaking recent tradition for the Washington Post, actually causing the Post to shelve or put aside their planned endorsement of Kamala Harris was just a terrible, terrible look for the news organization, and rightly drew a lot of attention to Bezos and to Trump. It's a perfectly legitimate stance for a newspaper owner or publisher to not endorse. It's a really bad way to do this, and it's caused, you know, understandable havoc. 250,000 canceled subscriptions, a newsroom up in arms, an editorial opinion staff that doesn't know, you know, how they move forward like this. So okay decision, awful timing.
Over the weekend, Trump said he doesn't mind someone shooting a journalist. How dangerous do you think this statement is, and what should journalism and journalists themselves expect if Trump gets elected today?
So let me just go back to your prior question just for a second, because there was something I didn't say, and that is that when Bezos made the decision, given the timing in which he made it, there was no other way to look at this than him being compliant with Trump and putting his other business interests ahead of that of the country and of the Washington Post. So that's what contributed to the bad timing. Look, the suggestion again by Trump of having violence inflicted upon journalists covering his campaign is bluntly, utterly grotesque. And he's not making that suggestion in a vacuum. He's making the suggestion amid a rise in political violence. We saw what happened at the Capitol in January 6, 2021. We saw one assassination attempt on the president. We saw plans for a second assassination attempt get foiled. We've seen Trump, alluding to violence in other times. We've seen, other militia kinds of groups saying online that maybe we needed violence in our political system. So for him to get up at a rally and imply that violence would be good against hardworking journalists who are covering that rally is there's no other way to say it. It's just grotesque.
Trump supporters, as along with himself, have been very critical of the 60 Minutes take on Kamala Harris's interview for the way they edited it. What do you make of this, and do you think those criticisms are valid?
No, I don't. I think it's dumb. I look. I understand they're trying to make hay out of this in the same way they're trying to make hay out of the garbage remarks more recently. But look, news organizations routinely and broadcast organizations routinely edit answers for time and clarity. It's what they do. It's rare that they give an entire interview to the public unedited. There are a variety of reasons to edit interviews, and they did what news organizations have done for pretty much all of time. The exceptions were earlier in this cycle when news organizations, two of them at least, intentionally said that they were airing interviews with President Biden without any editing because they wanted to make sure that the public understood, given the criticisms of Biden and his mental acuity, that they were portraying him without any editing at all. They wanted the public to know that. Harris, it's a whole different thing. Her mental acuity isn't being called into question. And so what they did was, partake in routine editing, and it got seized on by Trump, who, it's important to note, declined an opportunity to go on 60 Minutes and somehow is trying to turn this around. I don't think it's really caught on among the public. It's just, there's a lot of smoke there and no fire.
And looking forward, perhaps the next week and the next months after the election, what do you expect from journalists, and what do you hope for journalists, given that we might have a new president?
Look, we don't know sitting here today at 10 o'clock on election day in the morning, what's going to happen, what the world is going to look like tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Anything can happen in this race, literally anything. I know the polls show a deadlock, but no result would or should be surprising to anybody at this point, given the performance of polls in recent cycles. I think journalists just have to continue to do their job. It is going to be a fascinating, tumultuous week in American politics. If Donald Trump regains power, lots of sort of crazy things are about to happen, and it's going to be really interesting. If Kamala Harris rises to power, not only do we have
thank you all for tuning in to
first
SPJ New
woman,
England
first black
Student News
woman
Live
president,
from
we're
Suffolk
also gonna have a
University
deputy
Studio
candidate
73 in
who is going
Boston.
to
I'm Amrita
almost-
Kumar.
And I'm Emily Dempsey. We'll now send you viewers just down the road to Northeastern University. Thanks for watching.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Longo.
And I am Nakia Jean Charles. Welcome to SPJ New England segment of Student News Live.
Today, we are reporting from the Shillman Studios at Northeastern University and proud to join the hundreds of other students reporting across the country on this historic election day.
Andrew, how has the Northeastern community been preparing for this presidential race?
Well, the Northeastern community has been extremely politically active, with election-related events being held around campus in recent weeks. Northeastern Votes, a university organization that operates out of the Office of Community Service and Civic Engagement, has been working to register students to vote. Tabling events have been hosted in the Student Center and in public spaces on campus, at which students are able to register and make a plan to vote. So excellent work being done there. Also, Northeastern SGA hosted a debate between the Northeastern College Republicans and the Northeastern College Democrats. At the event, representatives from each organization sparred while discussing the hot-button topics of the election and presented closing statements that pitched their respective parties' presidential candidates. But the event was an example of how students are able to amicably communicate their beliefs in what has turned out to be an extremely close election. Impassioned and respectful discourse overall. Nakia?
Wonderful. Well, we are excited to share more about some issues facing Massachusetts voters, highlighting student work across our campus. Here in Boston, residents have been voting in person all day, with several new ballot initiatives on the ticket and a Senate seat up for grabs.
To check the pulse of Massachusetts voters at the polls today, SPJ New England correspondent Liron Bruner had the chance to speak with locals about the issues most important to them.
We're here at Perkins Community Center in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where we're talking with voters about their stances on the election. How do you think your neighborhood is going to be affected by this election?
I'm hoping it's a big turnout, and we'll see. We'll keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll see who the winner will be.
In a lot of ways, immigration, foreign policy.
I think we're all hoping for Harris.
I voted for Jill Stein.
As far as the neighborhood goes, I just hope that it improves the schools. Like the Joseph Lee School, I saw on one of the ballots, it was asking about getting rid of the MCAS, and I don't feel like they should do that because I feel like similar to COVID, it'll set the kids back.
I'm hoping for the better. There's a lot of improvement that is needed here, and I am hoping that we have a lot of better candidates this time around.
My community needs some changes, and we want to be able to use our voices to create those changes that our community need.
Are you happy with either candidate?
I'm going with Kamala. So, we're going to see what happens. We got to try. Well, dude is old, man. I'm tired of old people getting in there, man. Let's get some young, fresh minds up in there and let's make it happen.
Can I ask why you're voting for Harris?
She's a woman of color. I think it's time for a change. I think we really need a change. I think the other person tried to divide us, and I think we need to be united.
She aligns a lot with what I believe in. Again, it's a woman's choice what is to be done with our bodies. I don't feel that anybody else should tell us what we can and cannot do, not only with our bodies, but what we want to do in life.
I didn't agree with everything for both of them, but I agreed with more points for her.
I would like the person that is going to cause a change and that is going to work for the people of the community.
What do you think is the most important issue on the ballot?
Chaos versus order. Taking the Attorney General's responsibility for auditing and giving it to the state auditor. I believe in more transparency. Massachusetts is only one of 4 not to publicly release their expenses sheet, and so I'd like that to be public.
Who's going to represent us as a whole for our country? That to me is the most important part. We need a very good leader, a strong leader.
Housing. Because housing is very it's challenging, and there's not enough housing for a lot of people. So I think, and the cost of living is extremely high. So we want to be able to make sure that middle classes and middle classes are able to at least get some housing and also groceries, because things are expensive right now. So we want to make sure that we are able to, that parents, mothers, families are able to buy groceries without having to work multiple jobs.
it's just getting people back to work and, getting the country right, so everybody can eat.
And so why are you voting today?
I'm voting because this is my first time voting and I'm so excited and I want my voice to be heard.
As women, we should vote. Our right is to vote. We have so many that had come before us and fought for our right to vote. So I'm here just for that.
I believe in doing my civic duty and trying to use my voice in democracy as best I can.
I feel like it's important for everybody to get out and vote, especially with everything going on today. I feel like it's imperative.
It's my right. Number one, we've gone through a lot in order to vote, especially women, especially people of color. So many people that fought the fight for us.
There are many prevalent issues for voters right now, from education to women's reproductive rights to the age of the candidates. Reporting from Dorchester, Massachusetts, I'm LaRon Bruner from SPJ New England.
Thanks, LaRon. Since 2012, Emerson College Polling, a nonpartisan organization, has administered opinion surveys to better understand the attitudes and beliefs of the public. SPJ New England correspondent Victoria Hoffman spoke with the director of Emerson Polling about the results.
Good afternoon, this is Victoria Hoffman, SPJ New England correspondent with Student News Live. Today I'm joined with Spencer Kimball, the director of Emerson College Polling. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Victoria, thank you so much for having me.
So to start, it's election day and you're in DC. Can you tell us about the atmosphere of the nation's capital today?
Well, normally in DC, there's a lot of hustling and bustling with politicians, but they're all back home in their districts. So the city's a little quiet today, but the weather is beautiful for us who get to be here.
Great to hear. And since today is everyone's heading out to the ballots, can you elaborate on the latest polls this evening?
Well, there's a series of swing states that the country is focusing in on. Obviously, there's a national poll that people have kept an eye on, and that poll leans a little bit towards Harris. It's tied to maybe 1 or 2 points up for the Democrat. Traditionally, the conventional wisdom is that the Democrat needs to win the popular vote in order to win the Electoral College at the state level. And when we look at those state polls, we see also very close races across those swing states.
Absolutely. And a lot of the diction surrounding this election is that the presidential race is close. How close have you seen these polls as of currently?
If we go back to the 2020 election, we can see that in a state of Georgia, it was decided by under 12,000 votes. Similar results in Arizona, even shorter, win in Wisconsin. So we've seen a lot of close elections in 2020. And in 2016, we saw very similar in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin again, Michigan, very close elections that broke for the Republicans. So this time around, we're waiting to see which direction this close election will fall.
Absolutely. And has anything stood out to you in this election cycle in terms of polling?
Well, it's been a very exciting election cycle to monitor. Remember, we had President Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee for most of the election cycle, and Donald Trump was able to win that Republican nomination pretty quickly in the nominating contest and was becoming the presumptive nominee by February or March. And so now that race was shaping up to be a very close race until that debate where Joe Biden falters and then drops out of the race. And we saw former President Trump with like a 5-point lead nationally. And then Vice President Kamala Harris comes in and takes the lead back from Trump. And then we've watched over maybe the last 5 or 6 weeks, that lead kind of dissipate to where we are today in a very tight race.
Absolutely. And can you just go over once more the battleground states and how close those states are?
Well, we'll start with the ones that I think are least competitive into the more competitive states. And there's not much difference here, but a state like Arizona tends to be leaning towards Trump. Now, this would be a pickup for Trump because Biden won it in 2020, but Trump had carried it in 2016. So Arizona has been a state that's been trending towards the Republicans, really on the issue of immigration, which is different than what we see in the other states where the issue of the economy is more important. But Arizona would be a strong one for Trump. Michigan looks to be strong for Harris. There's a state that Biden was able to take back from Trump in 20 by about 2.5 points. We currently have Harris slightly ahead in Michigan, similar to that margin, and we'll see if she can hold on there. And then the race gets tighter within Georgia, Nevada, Georgia. What's the next? North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Those are all 1-point race, leaning slightly towards Trump. And then over in Nevada and Wisconsin, those are toss-up races that we think could go in either direction. So as you can hear in the polling results, these are really close races that, based on turnout, could impact who's going to win these states.
Absolutely, thank you. And Democrats and Republicans are not just fighting for the White House this election, but also for control of Congress. How are the congressional races shaping up currently?
Yeah, so for the House, it looks like the Democrats are doing pretty well. Out of the 435 House of Representatives, they have to pick up a couple of seats to take back the majority. And they seem to be in a decent position to do so, particularly as the vote comes in, let's say, California and perhaps a couple of districts in New York. Regarding the Senate, that looks to be flipping over to the Republicans. Earlier this year, Democrat Joe Manchin dropped out of the race, became an independent, kind of moving West Virginia from a Democrat or independent to a Republican seat after this election. And out in Montana and Ohio, there's 2 Democrat incumbents that are trailing in the polls, and we'll see if they can hold on with an upset. Otherwise, those are 2 potential seats for the Republicans to pick up.
Absolutely. And Spencer, can you elaborate on the work that you're currently doing in DC?
Well, we're down in Washington as part of Emerson College. We have a program here. We work with different community leaders and organizations throughout, and it gives us a chance down here to also discuss our methodology with other pollsters who are like-minded researchers.
Thank you. And just as a closing off question, has anything surprised you this current election in terms of polling?
Well, we'll find out tonight at election night when they actually count the votes. Traditionally, we're going to have a couple of polls that are outliers, and we're going to have to live with those results, but we'll wait until they actually count the votes to see where those surprises lie.
Absolutely. Well, Spencer, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you again for having me.
Amendment 5 on Massachusetts ballot would require employers to pay tipped workers minimum wage. Not all tipped workers are in favor of the change. SPJ's New England correspondent Jacob Isaac spoke with tipped workers around Boston to understand their perspective on question 5. Let's take a look.
As voters head to the polls this November, one question could reshape the lives of workers in Massachusetts. Ballot question number 5, asking if the tipped minimum wage should be abolished in favor of the standard minimum wage. Currently, tipped workers like servers earn a separate minimum wage, just $6.75 per hour. With tips, they're expected to reach at least the state's regular minimum wage. We asked customers at the Time Out Market in Fenway how they feel about this initiative to change things.
I think it's important to make sure that everyone is able to have a fair working wage. And so I wanted to see that increased over time to keep up with cost of living and everything else that's going on.
Opponents of the initiative argue that the current tipped wage system allows workers to earn well above the minimum wage on good nights.
I used to make around like $30 to $40 an hour with tips, just making like the $6 and change, which is obviously like double what the minimum wage would be. If it's trying to benefit like servers, it's not.
They fear that if the tipped minimum wage is abolished, businesses may raise menu prices and tipping culture will end altogether. We asked Jessica Dupree, a cook and server at local restaurant Lobster on a Roll in the South End, to see what she has to say on the subject.
Genuinely, for the Ballot 5 initiative in Massachusetts, this upcoming election, the majority of servers will tell you, please say no. I think effing with the smallest percent of workers is not the way to continue to help us grow economically. You know, some of us will take our entire paychecks to pay our mortgages and our car notes and our power bills. And that leaves us with nothing if we weren't to have tips.
As Massachusetts prepares for Election Day, voters will soon decide
whether tipped workers should make the same minimum wage as everyone else, or if the current system shall remain. Reporting from Boston, I'm Jacob Isaacs.
Currently, Massachusetts high school students are required to pass the MCAS examination in order to graduate. SPJ New England correspondent Viveka D'Souza spoke to parents and students that took the MCAS to understand the impact of Question 2, another state ballot initiative that would eliminate the test as a graduation requirement.
As election day approaches, voters are making preparation for how they'll vote this November. But beyond the contentious presidency, there's one critical question that will be appearing on Massachusetts' ballot that's dividing locals. Question number 2, which considers the MCAS exam in Massachusetts high schools.
To take MCAS just to pass high school is like kind of crazy.
The Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, or MCAS, is a statewide standardized test that 10th graders are required to pass in order to graduate high school. A yes vote would end this graduation requirement, while a no vote would not change this mandate. The system has been in place since 1993 with an aim to affirm standard levels of education across all schools. But voters are divided, with those closest to the issue saying the test only captures a snapshot of student knowledge. At Boston Latin School, parent Leslie and Brian hold strong views.
Do not think it should be a graduation requirement. But then, the argument is if it's not a graduation requirement, will students try on the test, or will they just maybe either blow it off or not try at all, and then you have inaccurate data? So maybe there should be some sort of maybe grade component. I don't know, like some other sort of incentive for students to want to partake in it accurately.
I don't want to see the curriculum being tailored to the test, so I'm not for it.
Some Massachusetts residents, now at Northeastern, recall their experience and share how they might be voting.
Ever since I was in 3rd grade, they made MCAS like this huge deal where it was like this crazy stress where you had to take MCAS every year up until 10th grade. And in 10th grade, it was when it really mattered, where you had to pass it to take high school. And they always said that you had multiple chances to take it up until senior year. But like, what if in senior year you take it and you still don't pass?
I think that the nature of standardized testing in general is a little bit outdated. I think when it comes to standardized test scores, it requires a lot of time, effort, and specific preparation in order to achieve a specific score. And it doesn't really reflect a lot of students' academic abilities. It mainly is a measure of the resources and access they have to study for these exams. So it's completely understandable that these teachers' unions are trying to abolish it, because teachers will also have to emphasize more effort on trying to pass these tests and coordinate their classes around these test scores, as opposed to the material that they're teaching students and the other skills like analysis, critical thinking, etc., that might be more beneficial for students to learn in their higher education.
But not all voters are opposed.
I think I would vote to keep the test, because the test assesses whether you could graduate high school or not. And, high school in itself is an assessment of if you should graduate. So adding one more test, I don't think makes much of a difference. And I'm assuming the test is easy enough so that most people should be able to graduate.
As it turns out, the MCAS is made to be passable. In fact, according to the Massachusetts Department of Secondary and Elementary Education, about 99% of students pass the MCAS. Some people see it as an important marker of student progress. Regardless of November vote, Massachusetts students will continue to have to take the exam. A yes vote only removing the MCAS as a graduation requirement. Reporting for NUTV, I'm Viveka.
Now, of course, abortion is a top issue for female voters in this election. In 10 states around the country, voters will be deciding today on the legality of abortion in their state. SPJ New England correspondent Namira Anamani spoke with Northeastern University students about their viewpoints on abortion laws and how this will impact their voting decision.
With the 2024 presidential election only a few days away, a hot topic this year is women's health care. In June of 2022, the Supreme Court handled the Dobbs v. Jackson case, which ultimately led to the overturning of the constitutional right to an abortion, which was also known as Roe v. Wade. This has led to some states, particularly in the South, restricting or banning abortions altogether. We surveyed the Northeastern campus to gauge public opinion about the state of women's healthcare ahead of this upcoming election.
So my opinion on abortion is definitely pro-choice. I do think I have a lot of family in Florida, so the idea of them not being able to access abortion, whenever they need it is very alarming to me. I also think that if you're comparing the United States to other countries, developed countries, I do think it's alarming that we are kind of behind in women's health care.
I really think that's essential healthcare that should be protected by the law to some degree at the very least. I think that overturning the decision of Roe v. Wade and leaving that to the states was just a major fault that shouldn't have happened.
I do think that there is pretty good access to it. I do believe that in a lot of places, especially in the South where I'm from, that there are issues in access, especially in more rural areas and among more rural communities, that there's definitely could be more outreach and output of these things are made available to people.
All of us are now called upon to advance the promise of freedom, including the freedom of every woman to make decisions about her own body, not the government telling her what to do.
I think that her take on abortion rights is something I strongly support. I think that she wants to give women more access, more accessibility to reproductive education and reproductive rights, more importantly.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit absurd, some of the comments President Trump was making in the debates. He mentioned a few times, especially in his debate with Biden and again in his debate with Harris, that post-birth abortions were a thing. that's never been a thing, and it's sort of embarrassing to see that on screen.
To do abortions in the 7th month, the 8th month, the 9th month, and probably after birth.
I'm gonna be so honest, I'm kind of out of the loop. I watched the presidential debate and the vice presidential debate, and I think the question came up maybe once or twice, and I feel like it was a little bit still in the dark.
I think that more exposure in hospital settings, more women working in medical fields, just to give women more of a sense of safety and a voice, I guess, in the medical field and the decisions that they make in a very tough time for people. So any president that's kind of helping with that would be someone I'd like.
It is money problems, and a lot of times it's hard to afford the types of care that people need. So
I remember recently that was the authority to offer those was kind of just handed over to the states, and I kind of support that idea. I mean, there's a lot of states that are being really bipolar one way or the other, which in any situation, regardless of whether I agree with one side or more than the other, I don't agree with being extremist. I don't feel is going to be a deciding factor on who I would pick to vote for. I don't think we found a balance in that particular area. I'm not sure where it is, though.
There isn't really a balance. Maybe, of course, there needs to be regulations, but maybe, in my opinion, there is too much opinions about what women should do and what they shouldn't do.
Today, we're taking a closer look at some of the candidates who have made waves in this election season. That's right, one of those candidates is Chase Oliver, the libertarian who's been drawing attention for his unique platform and message. While he's not a household name just yet, his campaign has certainly brought a different perspective to this election.
Okay, we are recording. This is Vivian Angelagisha, SPJ New England correspondent for Student News Live, and I'm here with Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party candidate for president. Chase, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. I look forward to speaking to you and your listeners.
Awesome, thank you. And question one is, it's election day. How are you feeling today?
A mixture of excited and tired. This process, you always have the long days, the late nights, and last night was no different. I got into Dallas, Texas, where I'm at today, a little after midnight and sat in a plane for 2 hours waiting to get off the gate because of the bad weather, which is like, that happens when you travel, right? But you got to be up, you got to be ready to go. And of course, today is a very exciting day, election day, when millions and millions of Americans will go out and make their selection for president.
All right, and that would happen, the 2 hour little delay.
It happens. That's the fate that, I'm very lucky that in this entire process, I've missed exactly one flight. And it was because that was the day that Delta and all the other, airlines had their computer mess up. And so I wasn't able to fly out that day. But other than that, I've made it where I've needed to go, which I consider as a candidate for president a very successful thing.
That's awesome. Question two is, what issues were most important to the voters that you encountered on the campaign trail, and what was it like to meet with them during your campaign?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern of the average voter is always going to be the economy, but in particular, I think it's inflation and cost of living is what people are looking at. We have relatively low unemployment, but what we have is really skyrocketing prices. And so the way to address those economic concerns are balancing our federal budget. So we're not printing trillions out of thin air each year, which devalues our dollar. But voters are, they're ready to tell you about their kitchen table issues. They're ready to tell you about the fact that groceries are more expensive or that rent is going up. And that's that primary first concern for a person, is like, how do they make their ends meet? Beyond that, I think the two biggest issues that are going to break in this election are for both immigration and women's right to choose. I think those are the two domestic issues outside of the economy that I have certainly been discussed with the most. And as somebody who is pro-immigration and pro-choice, it's an easy topic for me to discuss.
And what do you want voters to know as they head out to the polls?
Well, I want them to know that they have more than two options in their ballot, and that if they take an honest look and vote for who they think is the best, it will allow for more voices to enter the conversation. I don't want you to vote out of fear of someone else winning. When we do that, we condition ourselves to be stuck in this two-party system that gives us less and less quality candidates each cycle from each of the major parties. And so for me, I think the best option is for you to look outside that two-party system, especially if you live in a state that is safe red or safe blue. Your vote is way better invested building up a third-party movement.
And how important is it for that to happen, for them to have more than the two parties?
Well, I think it's what is the solution to the division we're facing as a country. We're continuing to be more and more polarized and hyper-partisan. And I think that's because we have an either or, you're with us or against us style of politics in the two-party system. That's why I'm supporting the Voter Bill of Rights as a matter of policy. It's on my website. These are steps we can take to actually expand choices at our ballot, moving ballot access barriers, adopting ranked choice voting, adopting proportional representation. These are steps we can take to tear down those barriers, and it's needed. It's vital for our country, because otherwise we're going to continue to divide ourselves and see elections just like this with a lot of vitriol and hatred.
And the final question is, what impact do you hope that your campaign had on the country and the Libertarian Party?
Well, we hope to be a disruptor in this election. We hope to beat the spread in many of the swing states to have an impact in this election. But beyond that, my keys to victory, what I would see as a successful campaign, is that we've raised awareness of the Libertarian Party, that we've earned the vote totals in states across the country to secure ballot access or party status for future elections, and that we've helped put a positive face on libertarianism. One of the biggest misconceptions about our political philosophy is that we are selfish, because we only care about the individual. We don't want to get the government involved. And so I think the best thing that I've done in this campaign is try to break that spell that we're not selfish. We just believe that the government is the worst way to allocate resources to help people, and we think there are better ways to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thank you very much, and peace, love, and liberty to you and all those you know.
Have a great day. Good luck.
Right.
That's all from us. Thank you for joining us for this half hour of Student News Live. From Northeastern University, I'm Andrew Longo.
And I'm Nakia Jean